Whenever you're ready.
Alright, so my stage name is Iceman, Heretic, a mortalized spirit. Iceman refers to Michael Bradley's book, The Iceman's Legacy, which is a look at why Western man is so sexist and aggressive, particularly in their policy towards non-white people. So Iceman, because my mother was white, European, and my father was black, African, born in Trinidad, but the diaspora, which is of the African ancestry, which was enslaved by Europeans for the purposes of colonization and theft of resources. So Iceman, Bradley's book, Michael Bradley's book, The Iceman's Inheritance or Iceman's Legacy, is in reality a look at the prehistoric conditions of Europeans in a continent that was cold and became resource scarce. Bradley's book really looks at, did that impact the psychology, ontology of how the European relates to this planet? From how the European has treated the planet, one can assert yes. So what Bradley asserts, and a woman who was half, her parents were African and Native American, Dr. Shashi McIntyre, what they assert is consciousness is a consequence of how you set up your paradigm for dealing with reality, is sort of given to you by your environment. So if you have a resource scarce environment, then it would be insane if you need food to survive, and you need water in a resource scarce environment with harsh winters, and you live in caves, which is what the European lived in, when the Africans had already built those pyramids, then that creates a hoarding culture, because you've got to survive. So Bradley and Shashi McIntyre basically look at the construct of consciousness as culture. Culture being how you treat Mother Nature, and by extension, given that humanity is part of Mother Nature, how you treat humanity as well. So Mother Nature in reality is the resources. And when you look at capitalism and what Europeans have done with the resources, it's been pure rape, sexism, misogyny, aggressive racist policies, and war. So what Shashi McIntyre and Bradley assert is that this particular paradigm, this survival of the fittest, is what the white supremacists call it, what this has done is created capitalism, because capitalism is all about hoarding. Now if you read, so that's what the first part of my name, Iceman, is about. Also I've had methamphetamine. So methamphetamine is a drug that I suspect CIA, Morrison, Dutton, Azio put on the streets. And the reason I think that is because there's out of 24 million people in Australia, with satellites, our phones being watched, our computers being watched, our metadata being hacked, the Great Hack, which is the movie regarding Zuckerberg and Cambridge Analytica, Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff, which looks at how we're being manipulated via the computer system and our phone, all of our data. We then have to look at, well, how are these drugs getting on the streets if they've got all the information about us? And we've got border force, border control, we've got militarized police, we've got police on the seas, we've got the Navy, but somehow they just can't find this methamphetamine. And then it rocks up to Perth Airport. A man rocks up, this is the story that Peter Costello at Channel 9 tells us, a man rocks up to Perth Airport with $50 million worth of methamphetamine in his suitcase. Now I can't get an apple into Australia, So I'm damn sure that I'm not going to get $50 million worth of methamphetamine. And we have TV shows that promote police and searching at the airports on Channel 9, Channel 10. So it just sounds like propaganda to me. On the same day there's 50 million found at Perth Airport, there's 1.25 billion, or 1.2 billion, sorry, found at a marina being imported in speakers. Now, that kind of story sounds like the 1980s movies, but we hear that they found $1.2 billion. Now, I don't think Morrison and Dutton are going to destroy $1.2 billion worth of methamphetamine, because that's $1.2 billion in profits. I don't think anybody's going to do that. So Iceman, the first part of my name, is in part a reference to that, to the drugs that I once had. And of course the irony in literature is the Iceman cometh, Bradley's book, of course, The Iceman's Legacy, and the depletion of muscle mass that occurs when you have methamphetamine is melting you. So because I'm half European, ice people, and half Sun, African. Now, I've mentioned before that when you look at consciousness as a construct of environment, what John Henry Clark, Dr. Shashi McIntyre, Ben Yosef Yakanan, all these great African elders and African American of the diaspora, ex-slaves enslaved by Europeans, looked at is, well, if the ice people, the European, are cold and lack empathy, which has caused this slavery, prison systems, theft of resources, the exportation of they're impoverished because the elites in Europe wouldn't take care of their own people, so they exported them to New Zealand and Australia and exported them to America in order to steal the land in the guise of, we're bringing Jesus and saving you from hell. Then what are the Sun people about? Well, the thing to consider again is to look at consciousness. Consciousness is a construct of environment. If you look at the First Nations in Australia, and you look at how they relate to the planet. So every First Nations throughout South America, on the small islands, the Philippines, Trinidad, Tobago. Trinidad is where my father was born, but the Aztec Indians were killed off by Columbus, enslaved, or the children used through the sex slave. So what are the Sun people about? The Sun people are in the most... the environment has the most fruit, vegetables, resources. So the Sun people therefore see the planet not as a threat. They don't see Mother Nature as a threat like those cold winters. They see the planet as something that has given birth to humanity, and there's an abundance and sustenance of food that nourishes the body, the temple of man, in order for us to experience life on this planet, and therefore flourish. But what Europeans have done is gone into every continent, smashed up those systems, told everybody that we're born of Eve, who's basically a slut, a downgrade to Adam, and for some reason the Adam and Eve story, Adam's not the son of God like Jesus is, but Jesus is the son of God. All of these contradictions. So the Adam and Eve story is so cynical because it basically states that humanity is born of sin due to a woman that is traditionally painted as white. And they get their asses thrown out of Eden. And then these white men have pushed this sexist agenda to say that Eve is the handmaiden of the devil. And therefore her period, her 28-day cycle, is emblematic or symbolic of the punishment that God bestowed upon her for eating of the tree of knowledge. Now, that is one of the most cynical stories, negative stories, that I've ever heard. it not only is sexist and chauvinist because Adam was first and women were born of a rib. All of this rubbish justifies particularly white men being in control. Now we know that Adam and Eve story is a figurative approach to how one can understand materiality. So when you look at those hieroglyphics in Egypt, which used to be called Kemet, which means blackhead or land of the black, you see that they created a holistic unified field theory for how to look at reality. So the Adam and Eve story is not based on two people. It's based on principles of nature, of how consciousness came into being. So what the white Christians have done in 323 AD is they've stolen the story of Isis, Osiris, Horus, Set and Isis, and used it as a way of justifying colonization. Because what white Christians really are saying is, when God kicked us out of Eden, he said, you now have dominion over the whole planet. So that means you can do whatever you like. The rest of the planet, white people only make 1/10 of the planet. The rest of the planet, people of colour, say, no, the planet is an expression of God. Materiality is an expression of God. So every First Nations, the Native Americans in America, the Canadians, the Alaskans, all throughout South America, the small islands, and Africa, all see the planet as not a resource to be raped, commodified, and used to enslave people in capitalism, but the planet is seen as our mother that gave birth to humanity. And therefore, if we are all brothers and sisters and deific emanations of consciousness brought forth into reality through woman, then we are units of God, experiencing life in our own peculiar way. What the Europeans have said is, no, you're not. You are, the only reason you're here is because of Eve. So the contradictions of that Bible, of how Europeans see it, is they'll call a child that is born from a woman a blessing, whilst at the same time say we're born of sin. Then they've used that religion to create nationalism and colonization. They've wrapped up the religion in a flag and said it is our duty to go around the world and tell everybody what we think, when we know the ideas are born in Africa and it's the other way around. That is that there is no hell. That's a concept. This whole conspiracy theory around Satan and the devil and the snake and the tree of knowledge, if you're elite and you're greedy and you've come from a hoarding culture, you have to control your masses in order to maintain your power structure. And if you look at European hegemony, pre-colonization, and you look at these different kings and queens, so Mary, Queen of Scots, all of them have just been killing each other to get into the position of power so they can get all that wealth and control. In Egypt, that wasn't the purpose. The pharaohs and those families, pre-dynastic families, had to be initiated and understand how nature operates. And if you look at it, all First Nations spiritual systems, which are distinct from religious systems, those spiritual systems are designed to initiate our young into concepts that are the planet is God or goddess. The planet is here to serve us and we're to serve it. It's a two-way street. If the Creator exists through us, then the Creator needs us in order to experience reality, more materiality. So let me back up a little bit. So we'll get to more of that. So that's the first part of my name, Iceman. Now, what's a heretic? So, heretic, there's a couple of theories about where the word heretic comes from. I read an ABC article about what a heretic is. And a heretic is basically someone that doesn't agree with popular belief systems. That's what the Greeks call it. Now, if you look at the God system, or the Medunetia, which is those hieroglyphics that try and look at reality and break it down into its parts so that we can understand who and what we are and where we came from. We're looking at, bugger off, I lost my train of thought, Iceman, Heretic. So we look at Osiris, Horus, Set and Isis, and then the particular gods within the ancient mystery systems, or the Kamau people, or the Cometian people, those African systems. We come across a god called Heru. And Heru was the first Jesus, which is a principle of the sun. So, as a heretic, I'm a heretic to white supremacy. I'm a heretic to neo-fascism. I'm a heretic to that dogmatic religious systems, including Islam. Even though it might have some great stuff in, I'm a heretic to those things, because in reality, the irony of my name is about going back to the source, and the source is Africa. Those ancient mystery systems teach us that we're brothers, and that this planet is here to share. And it's not about power. So, Iceman, Heretic. Now, what's the last part of my name? Mortaliesd spirit. So that's a play on words, but it's also based on those systems. If we are mortal, if we become human, the African said, well, how did we get here? Where did we come from? So they looked at the African system basically states that in the beginning was the Word, right? So what does that mean? So it means that before materiality, there was pure consciousness. And then the Creator became aware of itself, thus creating two. When one creates two, then that creates meiosis, which is what happens in the female womb. So, to become mortal is to be when you look at quantum physics says we're all one. We're all made of the same thing, and we all come from source, one. And therefore we have split, right? So it's sort of the paradox of reality. So when people talk about Satanism and this devil and all of that rubbish and the fall of man, Europeans have misunderstood the whole system. The fall of man and materiality is consciousness coming into being, thus creating materiality. Materiality, in the beginning was the word, is about vibrancy and frequency. So everything that we see around us is vibrating. It's manifesting through a frequency. And we don't quite understand, physicists don't quite understand, well, how is it coming into being? Because by that proposition, we ought to be able to get more energy out of sand than nuclear, right? So what the ancients said is, the fall of man is emblematic or symbolic when a woman has a child. See, a woman brings pure consciousness, energy, into her womb, and the child grows. So the African said, well, if that's happening with a woman, how is the microcosm? If we're the microcosm, then what's the macrocosm? So they figured that the universe was a female, was a womb, and that the earth was like a child inside of the womb. So they were looking at the macrocosm in order to understand the microcosm. So a woman brings into materiality, and the child falls out of her womb at birth. She brings into materiality consciousness. So the African was like, right, if that's the way it is, then women need to be respected, because they are actually a goddess. They are in the image of God. They bring forth humanity onto this planet. European says it the other way around. European says, no, it's a curse. We were once in Eden, and it's her fault that we're here, right? But they need that story in order to maintain what? Power and control. So if you can control a woman, then you've got a problem, because it creates misogyny, sexism and chauvinism. It doesn't honour women for giving life. It slaps them in the face. That's why you have characters like the pop star Madonna and all of these blondes that act as sluts, because it implicitly associates that story of Eve as being a slut. And if Isis is emblematic of this planet, or the universal womb, then white men who have stolen all the resources and commodified it, therefore get to justify their theft, which is a perpetrator-victim paradigm. They get to say, I'm the victim due to a woman, I should be in heaven. So now I've got to take over the reins and own women and tell them what to do and tell them that they're inferior. Africans don't see it that way. Africans say, what are you talking about? You're an idiot. Women bring us life and sustain us. They give men the opportunity to sit on the throne being the planet. So what you see is, so that's Iceman, Heretic, the mortaliesd. Mortal, I come into being as a mortal, and I'm a spirit. My spirit comes into being through a woman, and I become mortal. Now the play on words is mortaliesd, because as an artist and a rapper, my function is to break down the, not matrix, but the patrix. That is the patriarchal system within which we live. And share this knowledge with, doesn't matter what colour you are. Red, white, black, brown, or yellow, doesn't matter. We're all humans. So, mortalized spirit is, I speak of mortal lies, the lies that we've been told, in order to acquire and attain truth. So that's the name, Iceman, Heretic, the mortalized spirit. So this actually corresponds, it's funny how life turns out, it corresponds to a number of things that have happened in my life, which sometimes I think, who is running my life? So the first thing is, when I was, I don't know, it must have been 8 or 9 or 10, and I was on the bus, and I got on this bus, and there was this book, and it had all of these philosophy writings, and I'd just learned how to read. I think I was probably 11 or 12, and it had Wittgenstein in it, and I always remember reading it, and I was like, what is this? It was like secrets, it was like answers, and because when you're a child you ask stuff like, why is the sky blue? How did I get here? All of these things. And then of course much later on in life I did a degree in philosophy and literature and history in order to understand myself. So there's one more thing I want to touch on. So in this Bible, this Adam and Eve story, knowledge is demonized. The tree of knowledge is said to be sin, because when you get knowledge, then it's a sinful thing. So you have all these you have these stories about Faustian bargains, and so you get this knowledge, and then if you're an elite, you don't want your masses to have knowledge, so you've got to demonize it. Knowledge is bad. So when I talk to the fundamentalist Christians, they don't read. When I say, why aren't you reading other books? You don't read the Bible to fix your broken leg. But they're so brainwashed. Like, there's a young man I know, really lovely chap, out from England. He's doing a degree at that Christian cult's university. And when I question him about things, he just goes into denial. So if I say to him, the story about Jesus is a superhero story. That's all it is. It's a ridiculous story. First you've demonized women. Then you've said Adam's not the son of God. Then you've got a God that copulates with a married woman, right? So Mary was married, right? Or not married, or with some guy. and God has shagged this woman or gotten her pregnant. I mean, it's the most ridiculous story. And then it's a virgin birth. I mean, it just gets more wild. And I'm saying, do you believe this? He's like, yeah. And I said, but your resurrection story, you're saying that because Eve made this mistake, some God's son has to come onto the planet Earth 2,000 years later, get his ass kicked all around the Roman Empire, strung up in a tree, and by the way, you can do all these magic tricks. You can walk on water, which I call flying, and you expect me to believe this story. And he's like, but that's the beauty of it. I'm like, the beauty of what? It sounds psychotic. He's like, that man died for our sins. I'm like, Martin Luther King died for our sins, but what's that got to do with anything? He says, well, that means I don't have to do anything. All I've got to do is accept Jesus into my heart, and that's what my life is about. And I'm like, no, that's placation. If you accept that this story existed, it means you have to be accountable for your own life. That's why your priests are fucking kids. Because you're saying, I've accepted Jesus into my heart, I know that he exists, that negates the devil problem, I make a donation and I get into heaven. I'm like, how is that helping the planet? Well, we're bringing love. No, you're not. That's stupid. How come you're not marching on the streets, protecting the First Nations, who the Christians stole? All this land that you're on is stolen. He still doesn't get it. So then I went to the church just to see how weird it is. So I get to the church. I remember asking this girl out on a bus, and I was like, hey, and she kept looking at me, and she was very flirtatious. And I asked her out on the bus. The whole bus was listening. I said, hey, how you doing? I'd like to take you out. Can I have your number? She said, sure. She gives me a number. I ring her up, and she says, oh, do you want to come to a conference with me? Now I'm thinking it's like a seminar. It's going to be great. Remember, I'm a philosophy student. So I said, sure, I'll come to the conference. She picks me up. I'll never forget it. She picks me up. She's got a VW Beetle. And there's all toys in it. And I'm thinking, and they're her toys. I'm like, this chick's weird. And there's stickers of ladybirds. It's just retarded. I'm like, this is a bit strange. And we're in the car with a whole bunch of friends. We get to the Christian church, and she says, so the guy that you're seeing today is a healer, a faith healer. He's brought people back from the dead. And at this point, I'm thinking, this girl's whack, right? There's something wrong with her. But all the people there were like, yeah, he's great. You know, he's brought people back from the dead. And I'm like, why don't we take him to the hospital? I'm a bit innocent, right? I'm like, why don't we take him to the local hospital? Loads of kids with leukemia. And they're like, well, it doesn't work like that. I'm like, well, how does it work? And it's like, you've got to accept Jesus into your heart. And I'm like, well, let's go to the church and let's go to the hospital, get these kids to accept Jesus into their heart. We can get this guy's curing people, right? I was kind of like, this sounds stupid, but maybe it's true. I want to be hopeful, right? Believe in something. So the guy gives a seminar. Seminar's great.
Whenever you're ready.
So she tells me that this guy's brought people back from the dead. I'm like, oh, okay. So I've never seen this or heard any of this before. I was brought up Catholic, and then my mum wanted me to be a Mormon. So I went to a Catholic school. My mum took me to the Mormon church. It's all stupid, right? All those religions are stupid. It's nationalism and colonization. That's all it is. It's nothing about revolutionary love. Although some people are revolutionary within the context of those churches. So anyway, so this guy gives a seminar. I'm like, that was a great seminar. I got a lot of value out of that. Then he says, I can't remember his name. He says, I'm going to show you now the good stuff. You want to see the good Lord's work. And I'm like, all right. So he says, everybody close your eyes. So the auditorium's like, I think there's about 2,500 people there. So we're in there, and everybody closes their eyes, and he does this through the microphone. It's at this point I get dizzy. And I'm like, wow, I feel dizzy, man. And he says, keep your eyes closed. And then he starts jacking up the crowd. And I hear this sort of laughter in the far left-hand corner. And it's all these women, and they go into this laughing, sort of hysterical laughing fit. Now, this is at Oxford Falls Church in Sydney. I'm like, why are they laughing? And then I hear it on the other side, and we're all standing. And I hear it on the other side, and the laughter sort of comes, and I'm right in the middle, and then it comes to where I'm at, and I can feel something. I'm like, what is that feeling? And the guy's talking. As he talks, he's saying other stuff, but I feel dizzy. And he's like, keep your eyes closed, keep your eyes closed. And I hear these women laughing even more. And I hear, whoa! And as I'm like, fuck it, man, I've got to open my eyes. So I open my eyes, and lots of people are getting dizzy and falling, right? And then I look on the other side, and they're falling. And then the people next to me are getting dizzy as well. And I'm like, what the hell is that feeling? I say, what's that feeling? Now he's saying, the Lord is here. Jesus is here. The Holy Spirit is here. And I'm like, where? All I'm concentrating is on that feeling. And the girl next to me who's holding my hand says, that's Jesus. That's the Holy Spirit. So I'm thinking I'm going to have, like in the Bible where St. Paul says there was a flash of lightning or there's a burning bush. Someone's burning a bush, I'll tell you what. Right? I thought I was going to have some conversation with this Jesus character. What happens? What happens is I have this elated sensation in my chest. It feels like something's on the inside going like this. And I'm like, what the hell is that feeling? And then people start talking in tongues. Now, I'd never heard of talking in tongues. I didn't know what the hell it was. But people are starting to go, la, 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 and they're walking around. Now, I'm looking, and I'm quite scared at this point, because I'm thinking, what is going on? To me, as far as I'm concerned, to this day, there was a drug put through that air conditioning unit. Because I've had marijuana, ecstasy, cocaine, meth, amyl nitrate, cigarettes, alcohol, and that was a drug. Whatever they put through that aircon unit, what's more likely? Is it Jesus the Christ and the good Lord? Or is it something through the air conditioning unit? Because that land that church is on is stolen. And most of the indigenous that lived here have been killed off. So I'm pretty sure white Jesus didn't come to tell a whole bunch of people that he's here to save them from hell. That would seem like a logical conclusion. Now, meanwhile, in the arena, people are falling over, like literally falling over and doing all of this movement like an epileptic fit. Then he's saying, send people up and I'm going to cure you. And old women are going up in their bloody, those walkers, and they're walking away without their walkers. And it's just bizarre. And I'm thinking, this can't be true. This isn't real, right? So the whole thing ends and everybody's elated. And we go outside, and the girl that I'd gone there with, her mate actually, I had the hots for a mate. and they start lecturing me. And they say, do you believe in the devil? And I'm like, so the first thing they're asking me is, do I believe in the devil? Because if I say yes, then that's going to validate their theory for reality. And then the fear-mongering is going to hook me and pull me in, right? So I'm like, that's me thinking about it in retrospect. So I'm like, no, I don't understand why God would have created an enemy to himself and then kicks us out of Eden. That seems weird to me. I would never do that to my child. I don't understand. It doesn't matter what my child does. I might kick him out of the house, but I'm going to try and do everything I can in my power to teach him properly, right? So, that point, there's like 3 of them around me going, oh, well, it's the devil. Now, they start trying to tell me that the reason I don't believe in what they're saying is because the devil's got hold of me, and therefore, I am of the devil. So what have they done? They've manipulated me. Now, I don't think they're aware of what they're doing. But I was like, you're now telling me that I'm a devil because I disagree with you. That's really manipulative. And they got more angry. Then there was this really lovely little gay boy. And he, as far as I was concerned, he was really confused. He comes over and he's like, oh, I've been saved. My sister, I finally... And he was clearly gay. He's very effeminate. And he said, my sister came and got me from the Exchange, which used to be, I don't know if it still exists, it was a gay club when I first came to Sydney in 1991. And it's on Oxford Street. If it's still there, I don't know. And he said, I was going to have sex for the first time with a man, but my sister came and got me and took me to church, and I found the good Lord Jesus, and now I'm not going to sin. And I was like, dude, you're gay. Just accept it. What's the problem? And he was like, no, the devil's got me. I was like, dude, you're gay. And he was really lovely. He wanted to convert me into this thing. He clearly had... he said, look, I understand that they're grilling you a bit, but he said, only you can choose, but for me it's the best thing I've ever done. Now, I always wonder about that kid. He was 19, I think, at the time, or 18, and I always wonder, what happened to him? Because if you're suppressing your sexuality, what is the outcome? Now, we've seen what happens with these priests. They're fucking kids. And I suspect it's a function of, or a consequence of, becoming celibate. Or believing that homosexuality is the devil. And going into that church to try and assuage that guilt. And this causes a pent-up psychosexuality, which might express itself in a number of ways. We know that the Vatican has been raping children for at least 1,000 years. We know that the Vatican right now is still having orgies. We know that they have... There's one priest at the moment who was part of Reagan's Iran-Contra, and he was in South America dealing cocaine. And when he went back to Rome, to the Vatican, we know that he was renting young homosexual boys, having sex with them, and then after having sex with them, beating them up. Now, right now, what's going on with homosexuality, the media conglomerates are sneakily asserting that black people are homophobic, and that black people hate homosexuals. And even in Eminem's movie 8 Mile, you'll see Eminem, the white boy, the white superhero, protecting the black homosexual, and Exhibit, the rapper, being demonized for making fun of the black homosexual. So, and that's all through the media. You see it all the time. But here's the thing. Real homophobia is born in those churches. Real homophobia is those priests that have been on the pulpit, hiding behind the cloth, hiding their sexuality, when in fact it's been them that have been in the closet, and then creating hatred, which is again perpetrator-victim. They are the victim of their own sexuality, and then they victimize everybody else and say, we're here to save you from the devil. And what have they been doing? Fucking thousands of kids, and fucking each other, and then pointing the finger. When you go to the Vatican, I went to the Vatican, I lived in Italy for 8 months. When you go to the Vatican, a lot of the art there is homosexual art. It's, those little boys, those cherubs, I suspect were kids that were raped. When you look at Michelangelo's art, a lot of it has paedophilia through it. So it seems to me the real homophobes have always been the Anglicans and the Catholic Church. And a homophobe, I think, is a closet homosexual that points the finger and then tries to look good whilst inwardly believing that they're evil. That's what I think is going on. And colonization is based on rape. It's based on raping women, it's based on raping men, and it's based on raping children. That's what Europeans have done with colonization. The lynching process, by extension, is another thing that the African American looked at to try and understand what is the lynching process about. So lynching, most people think that lynching was hanging black men in the tree, right? Which is partly true. But part of the lynching process was cutting the testicles or the penis off. Now, a woman by the name of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing wrote a book called the ISIS Papers. ISIS, again, referring to Mother Earth, which is the goddess in the ancient mystery systems. And what she tried to ascertain was also, why have Europeans been so aggressive? Why have they done these really evil, nasty things? What's going on? So what she said, she came up with something called white genetic annihilation theory, which perhaps could be described as a reactionary modality to racism. She's tried to form out what is going on with this slavery, what is going on with stealing resources, what is going on with incarceration, what is going on with the demeaning nature of media conglomerates of people of colour. So what her theory is basically is, when you look at genetics, you can only get white from black. You can't get black from white. So she looked at, well, where did the white man come from? So what they looked at is, there's only one way it could have occurred: the genetic mutation of albinism. So the genetic mutation of albinism is when you see black parents who have pigment-free children, like I don't know if Brother Ali, the rapper, is an albino, but that's where the white race has come from, or the white phenotype. There's only one race, right? Human race. And then phenotype pertains to your physical characteristics. So the dominant gene is black, because you can't get black from white. So in reality, that means that the African, the black man and the black woman, are our elders and our fathers and our mothers, because they gave birth to humanity. But what white supremacy has done is said that white people came first, and white people built those pyramids, and white people brought civilization. When we know the mathematics, physics, astrology, astronomy, even the clock that you look at is based on black science and mathematics. So what she looks at with the white genetic annihilation theory is, are white people so afraid of black people that they have to exterminate black people because their gene is recessive and the black gene is dominant, so they're afraid of being taken over. Now what's strange is, when you look at how the globe, like when you look at pictures of Africa and America, they make out that they're the same size, or Africa and Europe, when Africa is like 1/3 or 2/3 bigger. So again, this insecurity is projected as white supremacy. We're the supreme race, we're supremely intelligent, we're supremely moral, we're supremely scientific, all of these things. Then when you start to look at history and start to look at that science, you see that the people that brought civilization into being was Africa. The first pyramids, they think 10,000 BC. So as we learn, as black people are learning, people of colour are learning that we're not inferior or 3/5 human, it's very difficult not to point the finger back at white people and say, you act like the savage. Because what they've done is, they've said, we're superior, and then said, black people are savages. And what did this do? It meant they could treat us savagely. So I'm what's called a mulatto, for example, or I think it's the derivation of the word is mule, because they said, we're supremely white, and if we rape or have sex with a black woman, it's like a stallion having sex with a donkey, which creates a mule. So I'm a mule, right? Then what we find is, you'll notice that black people are incredibly creative. They have the most diverse range of genetics in Africa. The spiritual systems that have been created are humane systems.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
All right, so politics. So politics, really to understand how the model that we're operating inside of, we have to understand what racism is. And most people don't know what racism is. Most people think that racism is saying some negative stereotype or positive stereotype about a person of colour. And now, white people are saying that's reverse racism. That is, if we dare to critique white people, then we're accused of being black supremacists or whites or racist towards white people. So let me give you a context. So politics has to be looked at in this time, in this day, inside of the confines of white supremacy, white elite hegemony that uses white supremacy as a methodology to rationalize the Western power structure, neo-fascism, and those religions, specifically Wahhabist religion and Christianity, all of the denominations of Christianity. So here's a basic definition of racism. Racism is the exploitation and extraction of non-white people's resources and non-white people for the specific purposes of extracting resources and labour free of charge or at a minimal cost in order to maintain white elite global hegemony. The racist policy is colonialism. The first expression of that was the use of the Jesus story to justify and rationalize slavery. Part of that Bible, that Jesus story, asserted that Noah was a white man and his son was turned black for looking at Noah implicitly in an incestuous homosexual manner. And so God turned Noah's son black. This rationalized the transatlantic slave trade from Africa to America. So what Europeans have done is basically perpetrate a victim. Those black people have turned black because they're perverted and incestuous and homosexual. Therefore it's our duty as Jesus' chosen to enslave their ass, whip their ass, get free labour, steal the resources from the Native Americans, and steal the resources, kill people off, murder, rape, pillage, incarcerate and enslave, and then say, what, we were helping, we brought civilization, right? So you have to understand the body politic is based on white supremacy. It's an extension of that Roman Empire. And if you go to Rome, you see that that continent operates as a third world country. That's what Italy is now. It's a third world country because the resources were extracted, the military is overextends itself, just like what Trump is doing with America, till finally the empire crumbles. So it starts as a rot from the inside by stealing everything, and then it turns in on itself. So that's what racism is. Now there's 14 tenets of fascism. Now when you look at that religion, that Christian religion, it can only be perceived really as fascism. You have a God that gambles on people's lives, like with Job. You have a God that apparently created a devil that is the enemy of Adam and Eve. You have a God that basically says, let's see if Job will continue to love me. Devil, do whatever you want to him. Kill him, give him boils all over his body, do all this horrible stuff, but I guarantee you, that Job will still come back to me and love me. So this God is fascist. Then on top of that, he sends his son to get his ass kicked. So the very nature of this religious system is not religious, it's political in its nature. It's political because it colonizes in the guise. A racket is when Al Capone and all of that was selling moonshine, alcohol, when it was illegal for the prohibition. What they did is they had houses or shops that looked like they were sweet shops for kids, right? Kids would go in and there's grandma at the front selling sweets to kids. But then down the stairs, through the alleyway, down the hall in the cellar, there's gambling, prostitution and alcohol. But on the front it looks all nice. Now, if you apply that definition to corporations, to empire, everything is a racket. All the institutions that could liberate us and uplift and elevate humanity to create a foundation, by creating a foundation of love and pragmatic integrity, would give humanity a sense of brotherhood. Capitalism and that religion doesn't do that. First thing is you have to look at superhero movies as well. Everything is interconnected to fascism and capitalism and that religion, that white Christian religion, Catholicism. And remember, the Catholics, the Roman Empire used to have a Caesar. When the Roman Empire was getting its ass kicked by the Christians, they said, we'll become Catholics. And then so the Caesar went from Caesar to the Pope. So the Pope is actually the old Caesar, in the guise of, we're bringing Jesus, when in fact what they were doing was bringing Jesus, and while black people were praying to this white Jesus to come back and save them, all their land was being stolen, their children were being raped, the women were being raped, the men were being enslaved, and they were picking cotton, right? So the body politic today has its quagmire and its marshland on a foundation that's based on lies, theft, murder, and a bunch of serial killers that used psychopaths to steal resources. Take South Africa, for example. The Dutch's version of that Christian religion is Calvinism. It's a master-slave syndrome. That is, God is the master and there's a hierarchy, like a caste system or a class system. There's a hierarchy. The white man is here to be the master, the black man is here to be the slave. That's the Calvinist version, which is what created the Boer War. Right now, black people are saying to white Europeans, you can stay in South Africa, but you've got to pay the rent or get the fuck out. And white hegemony does not like that. So it's used every dirty, lying, stealing, thieving, manipulative, cajoling trick, using the media, whitewashing history to make out that white people, invented the telephone or invented the light bulb or invented the computer system and the internet system or invented mathematics or science, when we know that black people did that in Kemet in Egypt 10,000 years ago. So if the body politic is corrupt, it's not about serving humanity. The individualism, which is an expression of capitalism and the survival of the fittest paradigm, that is social Darwinism, basically asserts that we're all animals and we have to fight and stab each other in the back in order to get to the top of the pyramid, right? This is fused with Jesus' atonement story, all very cynical. That is, we're born of sin due to Eve, right? So what Morrison and Dutton and the White House, notice it's called the White House, built by slaves, and this planet is the house, our home. The White House empire has lied and made out that white people are superior. That's a superiority complex, right? And that superiority complex is based on an inferiority complex. Because if you feel inferior, what do? You've got to go around telling everybody how superior you are, right? So they've introjected their inferiority and they've projected their own sin and criminality onto black bodies. And that's racism. And then use the media conglomerates, there's 6 of them, Murdoch's one, AT&T, 6 of them, and they use these implicit racist narratives to demean people of colour and say we brought everything and we're the best. Ex-Prime Minister, PM, what's his name? Who's the ex-Prime Minister before Turnbull? Abbott. So Abbott says, on the whole, Europeans did a good job. We brought civilization. So what is the body politic doing? They're rationalising their theft, murder, rape, slavery, incarceration, and mass murder, genocide, by saying, but we bought houses, cars and phones, right? So when you speak to people who read historical accounts that are written by white people, black people often think, well, maybe they did bring civilization. Why? Because we didn't know that we'd had 3 golden ages in Africa before a European had a shoe on their foot or a window in their home. Then we find out the Chinese taught the European how to sail and navigate the sea, showed them what soap was, where we had a guy called Septimus Severus, who was a Roman general, who went over to the UK, to England, in, I can't remember if it was 200 AD or 100 AD, and said the English are a joke. Remember, my mum's English, so I got no problem with critiquing my mum's people, which is part of me. So the body politics right now has always been based on fear. That is, black people are the devil, and we have to enslave them to bring civilization. You see the contradictions? The European has projected their own sin onto my father's people, the African. So when you see these corporate conglomerates go into Africa and steal all the resources and give Africa nothing, and then say to the people back in Australia, these starving Africans, it's terrible, they just can't get their shit together. Really what's going on is, these corporations are stealing the resources, then we're sending money, and guess who's getting rich on us sending money? Red Cross get rich. Look what's happened with those fires. The Red Cross are keeping $10 million for themselves, right? They did the same in Colombia, or it was either Colombia or Haiti a few years back. Red Cross, along with Hillary Clinton, stole all the money, so Haiti didn't get any money. And Oxfam went over to Colombia, and the CEOs refused to, did a deal with local women. They said, we'll give you food and water if you have sex with us. So it turns out the Oxfam CEOs were using their position to get sex. So the body politic is really, in reality, a bunch of elite white guys that are lying and will use their own white masses, right, and manipulate them, regardless of their own people being killed in wars or shot up, to get what they want. So this is brainwashing, right? The US Army, we know, since the US Army dropped that atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Australia dropped it on an atomic bomb on Maralinga, whilst the indigenous were just down the road. And then the Australian government said, oh, we didn't know they were there. They lived here 65,000 years, but they didn't know they were down the road. They goddamn knew it. They did it on purpose, because the corrupt body politic is a bunch of white supremacist elitists. Now, here's the irony, or the paradox, or the contradiction of white supremacy. If white supremacy is real, if white people are superior, right, and as Winston Churchill stated, it's natural to go in and dominate a culture, then why, and so white lives are more precious and more valued than black people's lives, then why does the elite allow white people to die? So the methodology is a contradiction, because that cancer that is exponentially increased, that the autism spectrum that is exponentially increased, the hypernormalization of these behavioral or cognitive or intelligent quotients that have reduced, or behavioral problems or cognitive behavioral problems that have increased, is also happening to white people. And then it's marketed through TV, like Boston Legal, or certain movies with people that have obsessive compulsive disorders. Now it looks, that grooms your mind, because then you normalise it and think, oh, that's normal. Say if it's not. If it's growing exponentially, then something's causing it. And that something that's causing it is an external cause. It has to be in the food. It has to be something that's happened during the gestation period, during pregnancy. It has to be a conglomerate of things. So we know, for example, Johnson & Johnson have been poisoning people. We know that L'Oreal has asbestos in their makeup. We know that DuPont allowed the factory to poison 70,000 people over a 20-year period, and they knew after 5 years. Mark Ruffalo's just done a movie. We know that going into Iraq was a lie, had nothing to do with the Twin Towers going down. John Howard and Bush. John Howard happened to be in Washington the day before 9/11, talking about the ANZAS alliance. Funny, because in the interview, the Reuters interview, John Howard says, I went to America to speak to Bush about the ANZAS alliance, right? What's the ANZAS alliance? It's Australia, New Zealand, US alliance. If anybody messes with those countries, and Canada, then we'll mess with them. What is it in reality? It's a bunch of white supremacists that have colonised these lands and then said, we've got the biggest weapons, we've got the biggest army, therefore we've got the smallest penis, therefore if anybody messes with us, we'll kill them. Now, what John Howard says in that interview, in the Reuters article, 9/11 has a surprise visitor. Howard says, I came to speak to Bush about the ANZAS alliance, which is about terrorism, if the Chinese come to get us, if whoever's coming to get us. But what does John Howard say, which is really weird? He says in the article, we didn't speak about terrorism. Nobody knew that terrible thing was going to happen. The whole ANZAS alliance would be catered around terrorism. Howard stayed with Bush for 4 days. They had lunch together before it. They had dinner together before it. As soon as the towers went down, Howard said, we're going to war with America. An illegal war. But we're not going into how many Arabians were on the flight? 11. Right? So now we know that House of Saud has funded 9/11. And right now there's a class action lawsuit against Saudi Arabia by victims of 9/11 whose families were killed, against Saudi Arabia for 9/11, because we know that they funded it, right? What did Bush say? He goes, right, we're going into Iraq. So there's a movie out called Official Secrets, and Official Secrets is a true story based on Bush trying to get dirt on people in the United Nations so he could blackmail them into, no, the word I just said, blackmail, not white male, blackmail. You see, racism is in language. So he could blackmail these UN officials to get every country to justify and rationalise going into Iraq to go after Saddam Hussein. So what was the ruse? The ruse was, not only had the Twin Towers just come down, not only did we know that 9/11 was planned and funded by House of Saud, we know all that happened. What does Bush do? He goes, fuck it, we'll go into Iraq. we can get oil. Because we can't control Saddam. They tried to kill him 6 times, but Saddam had been trained by CIA. And America has got a reputation of putting despots into areas that are resource rich, so they can still maintain the theft of the resources to uplift their military-industrial complex, give wealth and riches to the masses who will support the corrupt body politic in going into more lands, right? So the banking system and the body politic is all interrelated, and it used to be more so interrelated with the religious systems. What did Bush do? Now, when I asked the fundamentalist Christians, but Bush went into Iraq, what do you have to say about that? They're like, what are you talking about? What's that got to do with me? Bush went into the fundamentalist Christian churches and said, Jesus told me that I should go into Iraq. What has Jesus got to do with weapons of mass destruction that weren't there? So what was he doing? He's manipulating and lying in order to justify going into Iraq. What did Bush Sr. do a few years before? He said, this is for Kuwait, he said, they're killing babies, right? Remember how it turns out. So the Iranian embassy's ambassador's daughter was coached and schooled in a public relations firm to say, I saw babies being killed in the hospital by Saddam Hussein, or whomever it was. And it justified again what? So this is perpetrator-victim. This is, oh my God, they're perpetrating a crime. Those poor children. And what did Bush do? Create a war. What did Bush Jr. do? Create a war. So I suspect that 9/11, I don't know if they planned it, but on that day when 9/11 happened, Bush got every House of Saud family member out of America before he landed every plane. And Howard came back the day after, I think he came back 11/11, and said, right, Australia's going to war. So Howard, being a compulsive liar, we know he was a liar, he lied about GST, he said, oh, I won't do GST, 3 months later we had a GST. We know he's a compulsive liar because there was the baby overboard scandal where he made out that refugees running from the Navy had thrown babies, their sons and daughters, in the water, so the Navy would stop and pick up the babies. This is 2 days before Howard was, before there was an election in Australia. So Howard got to look like a real superhero, perpetrator victim again, when in fact it never happened. Then there was the wheat oil scandal with Saddam Hussein. What did he do in that situation? He was selling wheat, or Australia was selling wheat, so that they could get oil from Saddam Hussein. I suspect that whatever wheat and oil he bought, nobody ever paid Saddam Hussein, so they got the wheat and the oil for free. So you see that John Howard is involved. So that Liberal Party, then on top of that, what else did Howard do? He attacked the First Nations, sent the police in as white terrorists, just like Zachary Rolfe and Brenton Tarrant. There's no difference between those people. I suspect Jacinta Ardern is involved as well. So he sent police in to the First Nations, and then what did he do? Again, perpetrator victimship. He said, the Aboriginals are having sex with their children. Sociologists say that if you're impoverished, you have sex with children and you become a paedophile. Now here's the thing, that's called the Little Children Are Sacred report, or as I like to say, the Little Children Are Scared report. Now what was Howard really doing? He said that and used the sociological theory to grab the lefties who were like, wow, this might really be happening, like Aboriginal people having sex with their children, in order to justify what? Theft of more land, of more resources. This is John Howard. Use that format, perpetrator victim, to say I'm here to save the day, when in fact he was the criminal. But what he didn't address was, he didn't say, well, we've impoverished those people by stealing everything. What he said is, it's their fault that they're poor, and they're a bunch of child molesters. Whilst his Anglican priests were having sex with kids, and whilst his Catholic priests were having sex with kids. Notice, he didn't say anything about that. So the corrupt body politic today is more of the same. They're just using more sophisticated methods of propaganda through the media and implicit associative psychological mind games that people are actually waking up to and starting to see. Like a couple of days ago, they had Greta Thunberg, the activist for the planet, and they had 4 white girls and 1 black girl, and they cut out the black girl. Again, this is in alignment with white supremacy. So the white girl looks moral. So anyway, that's the part of the body politic, what's corrupt about it. I hope you learned some more. I hope I get to do this again. My real name is Andre Daniels. My spirit name is Iceman Heretic, a mortalized spirit. This is Heretic, out.